So a new report out of Harvard University reveals a pretty troubling fate for a lot of the unaccompanied child refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Now, for these child migrants who end up in Greece, it appears as though they are being forced to sell their bodies in order to afford the journey to the UK and other European countries. Now, the report found that the average price of a sexual transaction with a child is about 15 euros or about 12.50 pounds. Okay, so it costs to go from Greece to the UK thousands and thousands of euros. So most of the time, this isn't even enough to get them where they need to go to pay the smugglers to make the journey. All right. Now, the largest group of children selling sex are Afghani boys, along with Syrians, Iraqis, and Iranians. The majority of customers are older men aged 35 and over. Now, the report also found that some of the children selling sex become addicted to drugs, making it even less likely that they will be able to afford to pay smugglers and leave Greece to continue with their journeys. Further, it also identifies that rape and other forms of sexual assault of young children in the camps, an increase in child marriage and blackmail of some children who have been abused and had humiliating photos taken of them by mafia gangs who blackmail them by threatening to send the photos to unaccompanied children's families back home. So obviously, this is a really sad situation. It's sad, I mean, with the refugee crisis and these kids, a lot of the times are coming over, sent by their parents from these war-torn countries to find a better life, and they're here, they're hoping to get to European countries, and as we know, a lot of the European countries sort of closed their borders last year, and so they got stuck in Greece after coming over through Turkey, and they estimate that there's about 2,300 unaccompanied minors in Greece at the moment right now who are, don't really have a place to go, and they don't have translators, and they don't have a lot of other sort of easy ways that could help them sort of make the transition, hopefully, to other countries. And so unfortunately, they have been put in this position where they are selling sex to make money. And it's really sad.
Yeah. So this is one of the most tragic stories there is about the refugee crisis. And as we have people fear-mongering around Syria, and especially as we have someone saying that he cares so much about the beautiful babies that he's willing to bomb Assad's government. We still have that same person here in the US not willing to take in any Syrian refugees. So whether they're beautiful babies or not, as Trump calls them, he's like, if they're gassed, then we'll bomb people. Will we take them in? No, don't care. You hear this story, I mean, what kind of a person doesn't think this is heartbreaking?
Yeah. Right.
And it's not just Syrians, it is Afghans, Iraqis, Iranians, and Syrians overall, but very few have been placed into Europe, 191 last year, and that's it, 191. I mean, some numbers have it at over 5,000 unaccompanied kids, and it takes thousands of dollars to get to the countries if they want to go in through the ways that Hannah described. At, I mean, $12 and or 12 pounds, I should say, 12 and a half pounds. I mean, that's a disaster. It's not gonna work. They're not even gonna get there. And now some of them are getting hooked on drugs. I mean, this is what they came to the West for. We gotta find a way to help them.
And there is a solution. Real quick, I just want to give you guys a little bit of background. So for the Home Office, which is the immigration office in the UK, they actually had this Doves Amendment, which would allow the UK to bring in a bunch of unaccompanied minors and help them rehabilitate within the region. And unfortunately, they actually ended the Dove scheme. It was supposed to take in about 3,000, which would essentially take all these kids. They estimate there's about 2,300, which would allow all these children to come in. And they stopped it after taking only 350 children.
Yeah,
which is really sad.
The UK definitely does a problem right there. And guys, you need to understand in looking at some of the research, like European countries, there was an article that I'm citing here from The Guardian last year, have carried out 8% of the promised refugee relocations that they were going to say. And listen here, these are the two countries that basically took in the most refugees coming in after this agreement was Malta and Finland. If you're not from Europe, let me just describe. Both of those countries are tiny. Tiny in comparison to some of the biggest. They actually met their resettling obligations in comparison to all the bigger countries that actually agreed upon this previously, where European countries accepted less than 10% of the 160,000 refugees they promised to move to safety from unsanitary and cramped camps in Italy and Greece, as we're talking about here. And as Cenk, as you mentioned, this is the unfortunate repercussions of not following through on those obligations, is that these desperate people are going to try and find ways to find some sort of sanctuary to move to. And it's such a horrendous story, and it goes hand in hand with the hypocrisy that we see on this side of the pond. Now, again, I'm not going to turn around and say that the United States is at fault for what's going on here. There's plenty of other countries that have to be opening their borders as well and allowing people who are closer by to come in and try and find some safety. But at the same time, when Donald Trump is going in and bombing these areas, the first thing I tweeted out after is, if you're going to bomb them based on the reasoning that these beautiful babies were facing an assault, that's so hypocritical if you're literally not going to open up your borders and you have stated that you're not willing to let any of them in. None of them. That is the epitome of hypocrisy. So the United States has such a powerful way of potentially leading charge and opening up their borders and stating that we will accept more Syrian refugees. And in the UK, Theresa May, who's following hand in hand behind Donald Trump, she might follow suit as well and be more welcoming to open up their borders. But it is a result of these European countries not staying true to what they said they were going to do when it came to these relocations.
Now, I'm generally an optimist, but man, this story challenges your optimism about the world. Because not only are we not allowing these poor people, and we never learn from history. Same thing, the St. Louis came to the shores of America during the Holocaust, and we wouldn't take them in. At least 25% of the people on that ship were then sent to concentration camps and murdered. And here we are again, and we've got mass killings in Syria, and we're not taking people in, just like in the past. And we say that ISIS is like the Nazis. We say that ISIS is the worst of the worst, let alone what Assad has done with chemical weapons. And we still won't take the victims in. And then the second part that's super depressing is most of the customers are men over the age of 35. So they're buying generally young boys, and knowing the horrible situation they're in, they look at that and think, not how can I help, but how can I take advantage for my prurient interests? It is beyond gross.
Yeah.
Our reporter Jordan Chatton broke the Donna Brazil story. He was right, she just apologized for it. Help us get more reporters like that. You're the one responsible for that. Thank you, and let's do more right now at tytnetwork.com/go.